The Underground Railroad, America's Secret Network. Chapter 6: The Great Escapes. Part 6.1: The Escape That Wasn't the Precedent of Desperation. What would you do if your only option was to run, even if it meant risking your life in the process? For most, it's a question that lingers as a mere hypothetical. But for millions of enslaved men, women, and children in the United States, it was a question of survival, one they had to answer in the darkest of circumstances. With little more than hope and sheer determination, the act of escaping slavery was not a decision taken lightly. It was a choice fraught with danger, and one that carried with it the very real threat of death. If caught, many enslaved people were subject to public punishment, whippings, beatings, or worse, death. And the fear wasn't limited to the fugitive alone. Families were torn apart, loved ones faced the threat of being sold, their bonds broken forever, in a world where every step was surveilled, every action scrutinized. The idea of freedom was intoxicating. But at what cost? What would you risk when the very air you breathed was filled with the weight of oppression and the bitter knowledge that every day was a fight for survival? The desperation to escape. Imagine yourself as an enslaved person in the South during the 1800s. Your entire existence has been shaped by the oppressive forces of a society that considers you nothing more than property. You live in fear, with the constant threat of being sold away from your family, torn from the few people who offer you any semblance of comfort or companionship. And then one day, a whisper, a glimmer of hope, reaches you. There's a way out, a way to run, the Underground Railroad. But it's not as simple as running across a field. No, this is about survival, about outwitting slave catchers, about dodging dogs, and about running for miles through harsh, unforgiving terrain. It's about leaving everything behind, your home, your family, and perhaps your identity. Cinematic twist, not a spur-of-the-moment decision. When we think of escapes like those made via the Underground Railroad, it's tempting to imagine impulsive, dramatic moments, a desperate sprint across a field, a daring midnight run. But in reality, these escapes were calculated, often planned for months or even years. For the vast majority, escape was not an impulsive decision, but the culmination of years of desperation. It was a carefully weighed choice, not just because of the physical risks but because of the emotional toll. Leaving behind everything familiar and facing the unknown was a monumental sacrifice. Escape wasn't a spontaneous act. It was the result of countless sleepless nights, filled with the fear of being caught, and the horror of what would happen to your family if you were. You didn't just run because you hated your chains. You ran because you couldn't bear the thought of your children or your loved ones living the same life of bondage. You ran because you could not stomach the idea of dying as a slave. And yet, that question lingered. What if it wasn't enough? What if I'm caught? The odds of success, the chances of a successful escape were incredibly slim. The success rate of escapes through the Underground Railroad was low. Perhaps 1 in 10 would make it to freedom. The rest would either be captured or lost to the dangers of the journey. And for those who did make it, there was no guarantee that they would be safe for long. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 meant that even in free states, a runaway could be captured and returned to their owner. The dangers were real. There were the obvious threats, the bounty hunters, the slave catchers, and the bloodhounds that tracked runaway slaves for miles. But there were also the dangers of nature itself. The swamps, the cold, the long, tireless nights spent walking for hours, often with little to no food or water. It's easy to romanticize escape, to picture it as a heroic sprint toward freedom. But the reality was far more brutal. Many who ran away were forced to leave behind any hope of a normal life. And for many, the risk wasn't worth it. Those who made it, though, became legends. Their names immortalized in the annals of history as symbols of courage. Historical data, escapes and failures. By the time the Civil War broke out in 1861, it is estimated that more than 100,000 enslaved people have managed to escape to freedom via the Underground Railroad. However, this figure only represents a small fraction of the total number of enslaved people in the US at the time. around 4 million by 1860. For every person who escaped, countless others were caught and sent back to the horrors of slavery. Some were sold farther south, some were subjected to brutal punishments, and many were forced to witness their families being torn apart as a result of their failed attempts. The way to freedom, escape, was not just about the individual. It was about the communities that formed in places like Philadelphia, Canada, and New York, where many former slaves found refuge. It was about joining the fight for abolition, becoming part of a larger movement that would eventually reshape the course of history. But the journey of escape was not the end. It was only the beginning. The fight for freedom was an ongoing struggle, one that required not only escaping from slavery, but also the courage to remain free, to fight back, and to help those still in chains. Next up, 6.2 Henry Box Brown, the man who escaped in a box. In the next chapter, we'll delve into the incredible story of Henry Box Brown, a man who literally sealed himself in a wooden crate and shipped himself to freedom. This daring and unconventional escape is one of the most extraordinary tales of courage and ingenuity in the history of the Underground Railroad. Want to hear more incredible stories of escape like this? Make sure to hit subscribe to MetaFacts Legends. You won't find history told like this anywhere else. And check out the description for links to even more fascinating accounts of those who risked everything for freedom. 6.2 Henry Box Brown, the man who escaped in a box. What if the most daring escape you could make was to climb into a box and ship yourself to freedom? In 1849, Henry Box Brown did exactly that. His escape wasn't some dramatic sprint to the north, nor was it a carefully plotted journey under cover of darkness. Instead, it was a desperate decision to seal himself inside a wooden box, mail himself to freedom, and hope that somehow, despite everything, he would survive. For Brown, the idea of running was no longer an option. His life had been one of constant torment. His wife and children had been sold to another slave owner. And he knew that the only way out of the brutal system that had dominated his life was to escape, by any means necessary. The method he chose, though unconventional and dangerous, became a legend, not just for the audacity of the escape, but for the extraordinary risks he took to defy the oppressive system. The box that would take him to freedom is now as famous as his name. Born a slave in 1815 in Virginia, Henry Brown was no stranger to the agonies of enslavement. From an early age, he was put to work in various jobs. However, it wasn't until Brown was grown, working as a warehouseman in Richmond, that he witnessed the deepest pain of all. His family was torn apart. In 1848, Brown's wife and children were sold away to a far-off plantation. The devastation of losing them was too much. It shattered any remnants of complacency, and Brown realized that he had to escape, but he had no intention of doing so the conventional way. The idea of shipping himself in a box was sparked by his desperation and ingenuity. The box he chose was a 3 by 2-foot wooden crate. Brown wrote in his autobiography that he wanted to escape so badly that he was willing to endure whatever discomfort and risks came with such a plan. The box was so small that he had to curl up tightly, but it was just large enough for him to fit inside, and that was all that mattered. For the entire journey, Brown had to endure darkness, confinement, and the crushing weight of uncertainty. The box was so small and cramped that he couldn't move, couldn't stretch his limbs. For 27 hours, he was trapped in that box, with only air holes to breathe through. Now, imagine this: you're Henry Brown, lying motionless inside a wooden box. Every breath a reminder of how desperately you want freedom. The only thing you can rely on is hope. Hope that this box will get you to the northern states. But what if something goes wrong? What if the box is opened too soon? What if you suffocate before reaching your destination? The entire journey was a perilous gamble, as the box was loaded onto the wagon and then onto a train. Brown had no way of knowing whether he'd be discovered, whether the box would be dropped, or even if he'd be delivered to the right destination. The true cinematic twist here is in the sheer endurance of his journey. Brown, trapped in a coffin-like space, could do nothing but wait, his body folding into unnatural positions, while the world outside continued to move. Every jolt, every bump on the wagon was a reminder of how fragile his plan was. But he endured, surviving the discomfort and terror in the hope that his escape might actually work. Now, imagine if Brown had a GPS system in that box. As the journey progressed, the device would say something like, "Recalculating route, please remain still." It's a curious thought. What would it have been like for Henry Brown if his only navigation was a voice telling him to stay put and keep breathing? While this humor lightens the mood, it also brings us back to the terrifying reality. In those 27 hours, there was no guarantee of success, no map, no external help, only faith and the barest hope of survival. Henry Brown's escape was not just extraordinary for its audacity, it was also the epitome of self-liberation. His arrival in Philadelphia marked the end of one chapter in a life of constant torment, and the beginning of another. In total, Brown traveled over 200 miles in that box, from Richmond, Virginia, to Philadelphia. Upon arrival, his miraculous escape was celebrated by abolitionists, though many were also skeptical about how he survived the ordeal. While the escape made headlines, Henry Brown's survival wasn't the end of his story. After his arrival in Philadelphia, he became an active abolitionist speaker, using his experience to spread the message of freedom to others. What's even more remarkable is that after his escape, Brown didn't simply disappear into anonymity. He became a living symbol for the abolitionist movement. His story a testament to the desperate lengths people would go to gain freedom. His eventual success inspired countless others to risk their lives for liberty. However, the twist to Brown's story came with the realization that his escape wasn't just about one man's triumph. It had much wider ramifications. His bold act showed enslaved people that they could escape using their wits. Not just their legs, but it also showed the world that slavery's grasp was not invincible. It could be challenged, even from the most seemingly hopeless situations. In the next section, we explore what happened after Brown made it to freedom. How did his escape shape his life, and how did he use his story to further the cause of abolition? Part 6.3 The Box That Changed Everything, The Aftermath. After Henry Brown's daring escape, the journey of his life was far from over. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that saw Brown transform from an ordinary man, one who had been enslaved, into a celebrated figure in the abolitionist movement. However, his escape, while extraordinary, was only a piece of the larger puzzle that was the fight for freedom. When Brown arrived in Philadelphia, the city of freedom for many escaping slavery, the magnitude of what he had done began to sink in. He had done the impossible. He had shipped himself out of slavery, out of Virginia, into the northern states. But what was next for him? What was the price of freedom? And how could a man, so familiar with oppression, redefine himself in this new world? Philadelphia was a city buzzing with the energy of abolitionist movements, filled with people fighting for the same cause Brown had just risked his life to achieve. Upon his arrival, he was taken in by abolitionist groups who were in awe of his audacity and bravery. It wasn't just the fact that he'd escaped slavery that caught attention, it was the how. He'd escaped in a box, and that bold act would not only make him a symbol of courage, but also a figure whose story could inspire thousands. Brown's first steps into freedom were marked by his deep gratitude for his new life, but also by the intense challenge of rebuilding himself, while he was now a free man in the eyes of the law. The deep scars of slavery were not so easily shed. He struggled to adjust to the rhythms of free life. In some ways, the constraints of living as a slave had prepared him for survival. But now, in freedom, he had to confront the reality of his own emotions, his psychological wounds, and his desire to help others escape. Henry Brown didn't waste time. He began speaking out, telling his story at abolitionist meetings, and using his unique position to connect with those still trapped in slavery. He became an advocate for freedom, meeting with other abolitionists and working alongside influential figures like Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison. But the impact of Brown's story wasn't just confined to the North. It reverberated across the South and helped galvanize efforts to rescue more slaves from the grip of bondage. His escape proved to others that it was possible to outwit the system. As Brown began to speak publicly about his experiences, it became clear that his story would do more than simply inspire others, it would transform them. The people who had helped him, those who had taken part in the Underground Railroad and had opened their homes to Brown, began to realize something. He would not just survive, he would become a force. Not just a survivor, but a symbol of the fight for freedom. In fact, it became clear that Brown's impact wasn't just local. It was going to have national consequences. His story, his bravery, and his powerful voice had the potential to change minds and stir hearts across the nation. His escape wasn't just his personal victory. It was a victory for all who still struggled under the weight of oppression. Brown's life after his escape was a testament to the power of resilience. He became an active abolitionist, traveling across the United States and even to England to speak about his experiences and advocate for the end of slavery. His story was documented in his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Henry Box Brown, which became a vital resource for abolitionists seeking to push for legislative change. Beyond speaking out, Brown's efforts didn't stop with his own story. He became involved in a variety of efforts to assist those still in bondage, working closely with the Underground Railroad to aid in the escape of other enslaved people. His advocacy and his willingness to risk his life again for the cause made him one of the most influential figures in the abolitionist movement during the 1850s. By the time the Civil War began in 1861, Henry Brown was already a well-known figure in the movement. His bravery, as well as his willingness to speak out about his painful past, helped lay the groundwork for the wider abolitionist efforts that would culminate in the end of slavery. While many abolitionists focused on the legal aspects of freedom, Brown's personal story brought a human element to the fight that was impossible to ignore. His experience spoke to the heart of why abolition was not just an intellectual argument, but a moral imperative. Next up, 6.4 Ellen and William Craft, the master and servant disguise. In the next chapter, we dive into the bold and daring escape of Ellen and William Craft, a remarkable story of deception, courage, and the lengths they went to in order to gain their freedom. Ellen, a woman of remarkable strength, disguised herself as a white man, and with her husband, William, they traveled hundreds of miles, relying on their wits and courage to escape slavery. Part 6.4 Ellen and William Craft, the master and servant disguise. How far would you go to escape slavery? What if it meant pretending to be someone you were not? In the early 1800s, the idea of escaping slavery seemed almost impossible for those born into it. The South was a place of strict laws, a powerful economy built on the labor of enslaved people, and a society where every move was closely watched. But for Ellen and William Craft, the odds were not a deterrent, they were a challenge. Their plan was both audacious and ingenious. Ellen, a woman born into slavery in Georgia, would disguise herself as a white man, a bold act in a time when the color of one's skin defined their very existence. Her husband, William, would play the role of a slave, not an easy task for a man who had the freedom to think and who was about to risk everything to gain it. The couple's journey was fraught with danger, but they were determined. Every step was a gamble, every movement had to be calculated, and every word spoken had to be in character, or their lives would be forfeit. The Crafts had no illusions. They were escaping slavery, but they were also escaping death. Ellen's decision to disguise herself as a white man wasn't born out of whim or miscalculation, it was a necessity. In the mid-19th century, a free black woman traveling alone was almost certainly doomed to be captured. But a white man traveling with a servant, that was another story. It would provide cover, an opportunity for the couple to slip unnoticed through the dangerous checkpoints between Georgia and the free states of the North. So, Ellen dressed as a man. She wore a suit, a necktie, and a coat, cutting her hair short, hiding the physical signs of her identity. She perfected the accent, spoke in a lower tone, and practiced her gestures. William, meanwhile, assumed the role of a servant, following Ellen's every instruction, moving silently beside her. Their escape began from McIntosh County, Georgia in 1848, and from the start, everything was stacked against them. The couple had to traverse dangerous terrain, traveling through train stations, avoiding slave catchers, and managing to stay unnoticed in public. Every time they came into contact with strangers, the tension was palpable, the risk of discovery always present. Imagine yourself in the shoes of Ellen Craft for a moment. You're a woman of African descent, suddenly thrust into the role of a man, trying to walk the line between who you are and who you pretend to be. There's no room for error. One slip-up, one incorrect gesture, one glance at your hands, and everything will fall apart. Each time you pass a checkpoint, you can't help but wonder, will this be the time we get caught? Will a simple glance from a guard give us away? Ellen's disguise was crucial, but the act of holding her composure through every moment of that journey was the true test. Every day was a new gamble, where the odds seemed insurmountable. She had to become someone else entirely, someone so convincing that even the most careful observer would never see through her ruse. The couple's journey from Georgia to Philadelphia was a grueling test of endurance, with Ellen often battling the discomfort of her disguise, and William struggling to maintain the facade of a faithful servant while protecting his wife. As the journey went on, the stress of it all would occasionally bubble to the surface. One of the most telling, and somewhat humorous, moments was when Ellen began to feel the discomfort of her disguise. Wearing the thick coat, the stiff collar, and pretending to be something she wasn't, she felt her neck itch. It must have been maddening. Imagine the discomfort, trying to pretend you're someone else, even physically feeling the strain of it. If only she had a few minutes of rest, perhaps a good stretch, but no. Every moment counted as they made their way from place to place. William would occasionally attempt to lighten the mood, joking about the obvious discomfort. He must have wondered aloud, imagine if we had a mirror to see how ridiculous we look. The story of Ellen and William Craft is not just one of bravery and deception, but also one of ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. According to records from the National Archives, Ellen and William managed to evade detection for over 1,000 miles. Relying on their wits and courage, they crossed state lines, evaded slave catchers, and faced countless close calls. It wasn't until they reached Philadelphia that they could truly begin to breathe again. But even after their escape, the fight wasn't over. The couple's story became one of the most powerful examples of resistance during the abolitionist movement. Ellen and William didn't simply stop at escaping slavery. They used their story to become outspoken advocates for freedom, traveling the world to spread the message of the injustice of slavery and to advocate for emancipation. Their journey was also symbolic of the greater movement toward abolition. Every mile they traveled was a testimony to the power of resistance, and their escape became an enduring symbol of the fight for freedom. Next up, 6.5 The Great Escape, Their Dangerous Journey North. As we continue the story of Ellen and William Craft, we dive deeper into the risks they faced as they neared their destination, Philadelphia. What awaited them in the final leg of their journey? How did they navigate the final obstacles, including being so close to their goal, yet constantly fearing the worst? These escapes weren't just acts of bravery, they were carefully planned operations. What do you think was the most dangerous part of these escapes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to visit the description for additional details and resources that dive deeper into these incredible stories. Part 6.5 The Great Escape, Their Dangerous Journey North. Imagine running for your life, knowing that with every step, every breath, the world could come crashing down. For Ellen and William Craft, escaping slavery wasn't just about distance, it was about outsmarting the system, hiding in plain sight, and maintaining their composure every second of the way. How did they survive a journey so dangerous, so fraught with peril, and still manage to reach freedom? The journey from Georgia to Philadelphia was a long and dangerous one for Ellen and William Craft. Their plan, while ingenious, was fragile. Every mistake could lead to capture, punishment, or worse. Ellen, disguised as a white man, and William, playing the role of her servant, had to be careful at every stop. There were moments when they thought they were safe, only to be jolted back into the harsh reality of their escape. The Crafts made their way from Georgia to South Carolina, then on to North Carolina, and finally across to Virginia. Each stage of the journey presenting its own set of challenges. Along the way, they passed through several checkpoints, where William had to act convincingly as a submissive servant, while Ellen had to play the role of an authoritative white man with absolute precision. They took trains, coaches, and sometimes traveled on foot through forests, all the while maintaining their guise and staying out of sight. Every passing moment was a test of nerves. The tension was palpable. Ellen, feeling the discomfort of her disguise, had to suppress the urge to scratch her neck or adjust her clothing. A simple action could reveal her identity and end their journey in an instant. When they reached the Pennsylvania border, their nerves were stretched thin. They were so close, yet the hardest part was still ahead. The train station in Philadelphia, their final destination, was a haven for abolitionists. A place where many who had escaped found their footing in freedom. But would they make it without being stopped? At one point, the tension reached its peak when they encountered a suspicious official at a checkpoint. William had to rely on his quick thinking and immense self-restraint. When the officer asked why William was so quiet, William responded in the most nonchalant way possible. "I'm just tired from the long journey." The officer, somewhat satisfied with the answer, waved him through, and they continued on, nearly breaking down in relief once they were out of sight. Upon reaching Philadelphia, the Crafts' hope for safety turned into a new reality, a world filled with new challenges, but also new allies. They were welcomed by Levi Coffin, a prominent figure in the abolitionist movement, who was instrumental in providing assistance to runaway slaves via the Underground Railroad. Levi Coffin's house, known as the Grand Central Station of the Underground Railroad, became a sanctuary for Ellen and William. Coffin and his wife helped the Crafts secure shelter, food, and safety, giving them a taste of the support network that existed for those fleeing slavery. In Philadelphia, they found not just freedom but also the beginning of a new purpose. Here, the Crafts became not only part of the abolitionist movement but also instrumental in helping others escape. They became a bridge for those who were still trapped in the hell of slavery, spreading the message of resistance and courage to others. Despite the gravity of their escape, there were moments that could only be seen as ironic. When William was exhausted from the journey, his anxiety and fatigue occasionally took over. At one point, after a particularly harrowing checkpoint, William joked with Ellen, "At least I can say I'm an expert at pretending to be a servant now. If there's a role for it in the future, I'll be first in line." Ellen, in her disguise as a white man, couldn't help but laugh softly, though it was clear that even in these moments of levity, the tension never truly lifted. Their relief was fleeting, as they knew that their escape wasn't the end. It was just another beginning. The escape of Ellen and William Craft is one of the most famous stories from the Underground Railroad. Their daring plan to disguise themselves was not just an act of survival, but also a clear symbol of resistance. They were not the first to disguise themselves, but their story stood out because of the complexity of their plan and their success. The route they took was calculated, with each move being assessed for the possibility of failure. The historical records indicate that they were not alone in their journey. Many abolitionists and conductors along the way helped them avoid detection, including key figures in Philadelphia and the northern states. Their journey from Georgia to Philadelphia took several weeks, and throughout that time, they encountered both friendly and hostile faces, making the journey a mixture of hope and dread. The couple's arrival in Philadelphia was not the final chapter of their story. After reaching freedom, Ellen and William Craft became active in the abolitionist movement. They traveled widely, sharing their story with others, speaking at abolitionist meetings, and working to help others escape the horrors of slavery. Their experience mirrored the struggle of countless others, as they joined the fight to end slavery and worked to help create a society where freedom was a right for all. Next up, Part 6.6 Return to the South, a new mission. In the next part of the story, Ellen and William Craft's journey takes a new turn. After escaping to freedom, they don't rest. Instead, they make a bold decision to return to the South and help those still trapped in slavery. This new mission is filled with its own set of dangers, strategies, and betrayals, but it highlights the strength and dedication that the Crafts brought to their mission of freedom. Part 6.6 Return to the South, a new mission. After achieving freedom, Ellen and William Craft could have easily settled into a peaceful life in the North, leaving behind the brutal reality of slavery. But they chose a different path, one that carried them back into the very heart of danger. With the same courage that had propelled them to freedom, they made the bold decision to return to the South, to rescue others still trapped in the brutal system of slavery. Their mission was no longer just about survival, it was about rescue. They had escaped, but the fight for freedom didn't stop there. They knew they couldn't rest while their families, friends, and countless others remained in chains. They returned to the South to help other enslaved people escape, using their own experiences to guide them through a land still filled with peril. Ellen and William knew the risk they were taking. Going back to the South meant returning to the very place that had stripped them of their freedom, the place where they had been forced to live under constant fear. But they had a purpose. Their mission was now larger than themselves. It was a mission that would change the course of their lives, and the lives of countless others. The return journey was no easy feat. Ellen and William had to be even more careful this time. They couldn't simply waltz back into their old lives in the South. They were now outlaws in the eyes of the law, and if they were caught, they would face the full wrath of a system that would stop at nothing to punish them. But the couple had a strategy. They had learned how to navigate the labyrinth of slavery and oppression. Their tactics were clever, their strategy precise. They knew that to save more lives, they had to blend in, be invisible, and avoid drawing attention. They traveled in disguise, sometimes posing as plantation owners, at other times pretending to be hired hands. They used their knowledge of the South to avoid detection, relying on safe houses, secret signals, and the help of fellow abolitionists who were still fighting the system from within. They knew the lay of the land. They understood the dangerous traps of slave patrols, and how to navigate the treacherous backroads of the South. Every stop was a calculated risk. Every glance from a stranger could give them away. Their nerves were constantly on edge, yet their resolve never faltered. One of the most powerful moments of their return came when they helped free someone who was not just a stranger, but a close family member. A person they knew and loved had been left behind when they escaped. And now, they had the opportunity to rescue them. But this rescue wasn't without complications. The person they sought to help was not just a family member. They had been betrayed by someone they trusted. Someone who had turned against them for a personal gain. A twist of betrayal lingered in the air. The trauma of betrayal had once again become a painful reminder that not everyone could be trusted. And not everyone believed in the cause of freedom. Despite the betrayal, Ellen and William knew they had no choice but to move forward, to bring their loved one to safety, even at the risk of their own lives. Their mission had become more personal, more urgent. The rescue of this family member was an act of love, but it was also a symbol of redemption. They were proving that despite the heartbreak, the destruction, and the betrayal, the fight for freedom could and would continue. Ellen and William's return to the South was not an isolated case. Many abolitionists risked their lives to help others escape slavery, even after they themselves had found freedom. Records show that after their daring escape, Ellen and William helped dozens of enslaved people reach the North. Their network, which was part of a larger effort known as the Underground Railroad, was instrumental in helping hundreds of enslaved people gain their freedom. While the exact number of people they helped is difficult to determine, it's estimated that Ellen and William Craft were directly involved in helping at least 10 people escape, and many more indirectly through the network of abolitionists they helped organize. Levi Coffin, an influential abolitionist and conductor of the Underground Railroad, was one of their key allies. Coffin, known as the president of the Underground Railroad, worked closely with the Crafts, and together, they played a vital role in bringing freedom to those still trapped in slavery. Their return to the South was a reminder of the continuing fight against the evils of slavery. Even as the system's grip seemed all-powerful, they showed that freedom was possible, and that the fight would not stop until every person could stand as free as they had. Their actions inspired a new generation of abolitionists and created a ripple effect that would eventually contribute to the collapse of slavery. Next up, Part 6.7, The Legacy of the Great Escapes. In the next part, we take a deeper look at the legacy of the Great Escapes, how they impacted the abolitionist movement, and the profound influence they had on the fight for freedom. We will explore how the stories of escape, like those of Ellen and William Craft, helped fuel the moral arguments that would lead to the Civil War and the eventual end of slavery. Part 6.7, The Legacy of the Great Escapes. The stories of Ellen and William Craft, Henry Box Brown, and countless other brave souls who risked everything to escape slavery are much more than individual triumphs. They are the cornerstones of a legacy that helped ignite the fire of abolitionism and catalyzed the eventual collapse of slavery in America. Their daring escapes were not just personal acts of survival, but political acts that reverberated across the nation, challenging the very foundations of the institution of slavery. Each successful escape was a blow to the system, a victory for freedom, and a story that added fuel to the moral fire of abolitionism. These escape stories would be rallying cries, shaping the movement that would eventually lead to the Civil War and the end of slavery. The Underground Railroad became a beacon of hope for those trapped in bondage. And with each escape, the network grew stronger, more organized, and more defined in its mission. The courage of individuals like the Crafts and Brown gave voice to the voiceless, and the stories of their escape served as a powerful testament to the human spirit's ability to withstand unimaginable odds for the sake of liberty. However, the legacy of these escapes was not just about individual freedom. It also became a moral imperative for the nation. Each act of defiance against the system of slavery was a challenge to the nation's conscience, forcing the question, how could a country that prided itself on freedom and democracy continue to condone such brutality? Imagine a world where the very notion of freedom is still being fought for, where entire groups of people are still enslaved, struggling to find a way out. Every escape, every person who made it to the north, added fuel to a growing movement. But the stakes were high, and not everyone was fortunate enough to succeed. Successes were celebrated and became stories to inspire others, but failures, those painful stories of captures and recaptures, also left their mark. Each failed escape brought with it not just the loss of a person's dream of freedom, but also a chilling reminder of the relentless power of the institution of slavery. Every escape, whether successful or not, added weight to the cause. What many don't realize is that the failures in these escapes were just as important as the successes. The captured runaway slaves who were returned to the South often found themselves subjected to even harsher conditions as a result of their attempt to flee. The system responded with ever more brutal laws, including the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which forced free states to aid in the capture of runaway slaves. This law galvanized the abolitionist movement even further, leading to more resistance and eventually contributing to the civil unrest that would culminate in the Civil War. But despite the hardships, every escape shook the very foundation of slavery. It was a constant reminder to enslavers that no matter how deeply the system was entrenched, there would always be those willing to fight for freedom, and that was a threat they could not ignore. The data surrounding the Underground Railroad and the mass escapes of enslaved people is staggering. Historical records suggest that over 100,000 enslaved individuals escaped to freedom via the Underground Railroad between 1810 and 1865. Though estimates vary, however, the reality of the escapes was far from idealistic. Not all of them was successful. It's believed that up to half of all attempted escapes ended in failure. Many escapees were captured and returned to slavery, often facing severe punishment or even death as a consequence of their attempts. But despite these tragic outcomes, the successes outweighed the losses. Each escape added to the growing network of abolitionist activity and further built the momentum toward the eventual abolition of slavery. The success rate of escapes increased as the Underground Railroad became more organized, particularly with key figures like Levi Coffin and Harriet Tubman playing vital roles in creating safe havens, secret routes, and new methods of communication. Tubman's bravery and experience helped guide over 300 people to freedom, and her actions became emblematic of the power of the Underground Railroad. For every escape that failed, there was a lesson learned, and with each success, there was a renewed commitment to the cause. The network grew stronger with each passing year, and by the time of the Civil War, the abolitionist movement was a national force, with thousands of people involved in the fight against slavery. Next up, Part 6.8, The Final Twist, The Unseen Heroes. In the next chapter, we'll explore the unsung heroes of the Underground Railroad, those whose names remain unknown to history, but whose actions were essential in making these great escapes possible. We will delve into the hidden stories of these individuals and give them the recognition they deserve. Part 6.8, The Final Twist, The Unseen Heroes. In every great escape, there are countless unsung heroes, people who acted in the shadows, whose names are not written in history books. Yet without them, the stories of freedom would never have been possible. Imagine the countless individuals who risked their lives to help those seeking freedom, yet are barely remembered today. They were not abolitionists in the public eye, but they made the underground movement work. The story of the Underground Railroad is often told through the most well-known names: Harriet Tubman, Levi Coffin, and other prominent abolitionists. But for every freedom seeker that escaped, there were thousands of hidden helpers whose contributions were just as crucial. These were the station masters who ran safe houses, the farmers who hid fugitives, the townspeople who provided food and shelter, and even those who provided secret signals. Yet, they remain nameless in the official narrative. In fact, much of the success of the Underground Railroad can be attributed to these hidden allies who provided support in plain sight. They risked their families, their homes, and their lives to help enslaved individuals escape, often without ever receiving recognition for their actions. Take, for example, a simple Quaker family in the Midwest. For years, they opened their doors to fugitive slaves, hiding them in their attic, feeding them, and moving them through secret routes at night. Their contribution was monumental, yet their names are lost to history. These families lived with constant fear of being discovered by local authorities. Yet they remain steadfast in their commitment to the cause. Picture the scene: a modest farm in the Ohio Valley, where the farmer, a quiet, middle-aged man, keeps a sharp eye out for any approaching authorities. At the edge of his property, in a small, withered barn, a group of escaped slaves huddles together, waiting for the signal to move on. They trust him, they rely on him, yet his name is lost to time. His face is forgotten. He was one of the many hidden helpers, one of the many who never sought recognition. For these unsung heroes, the price of helping was high. If they were discovered, they could be arrested, their property seized, and their families destroyed. And yet, they carried on, because they believed in something greater than themselves. They believed in freedom. What makes these unsung heroes truly remarkable is the personal risks they took. Some of them were abolitionists themselves, but many weren't. Many were simply everyday people, farmers, blacksmiths, innkeepers, who couldn't stand to see human beings treated as property. They couldn't live with the injustice, and so they acted. They often helped with no expectation of compensation or reward. In many ways, they were ordinary people doing extraordinary things, often motivated by a deep moral compass rather than any desire for fame. They did not seek recognition or glory. In fact, many of them were content to remain in the shadows, letting the freedom seekers be the ones remembered, while they remained faceless, anonymous. The Underground Railroad records, compiled by abolitionists and freedom seekers, contain references to over 3.0 individuals who played a part in the network of underground routes leading to freedom. Levi Coffin, known as the President of the Underground Railroad, is one of the most famous station masters. But his work wouldn't have been possible without the thousands of hidden helpers who helped move freedom seekers through the network. Coffin's records, housed in the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, offer a glimpse into the tremendous work done by these anonymous individuals. One such record is a letter from Coffin to a fellow abolitionist in which he describes a dangerous journey undertaken by a group of runaways. "We risked everything for these souls, and yet the greatest reward was knowing we had done what was right." Coffin wrote, "This letter, like so many others, reflects the quiet heroism of those who helped but chose to remain out of the spotlight. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Underground Railroad is the personal sacrifices made by those who helped without ever seeking recognition. These individuals, many of whom were black, some were white, played vital roles that kept the entire operation functioning. Their stories were never told, and their names were lost in the annals of history. Yet without them, there would have been no Underground Railroad. Without them, many of the most famous escapes would have failed. For example, John Rankin, the abolitionist who helped over 2.00 fugitives find freedom, relied on the efforts of countless local helpers, some of whom never received credit for their actions. These local heroes never made it into the history books, but their contributions were critical. They made the Underground Railroad not just a series of tunnels or safe houses, but a living, breathing network of human compassion. While the specific number of unnamed heroes who contributed to the Underground Railroad is difficult to calculate, historical estimates suggest that over 100.00 slaves escaped via the Underground Railroad in the decades leading up to the Civil War. These escapes were only possible because of the widespread support from unknown station masters, abolitionists, and common people who risked their lives to help those seeking freedom. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made it even more dangerous to help runaways. But it also intensified the abolitionist efforts. The more oppressive the system became, the more determined the Underground Railroad network became. What's truly remarkable is that this network was sustained largely by anonymous individuals who acted without public acclaim. Next up, Chapter 7: The Law Strikes Back. In the next chapter, we'll explore the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, a law that made it legal to recapture runaway slaves even in free states. This law not only brought devastating consequences for freedom seekers but also sparked a fierce resistance in the North. Some northern towns declared nullification, refusing to enforce the law, leading to a growing division that would eventually culminate in the Civil War. These escape stories are just the beginning of the larger battle for freedom. If you're inspired by these brave actions, hit subscribe, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and take a moment to read the description for even more content about those who fought for freedom, whether they were in chains or risking everything to break them.